Hi, amigas. Welcome, welcome. All right. Well, I will go ahead and get started. Hi, amigas. So, welcome to our very first installment of A Seat at Her Table. This is our new storytelling and mentorship series. The series is all about spotlighting powerhouse Latinas in leadership, mujeres who are not only breaking barriers in their careers, but also redefining what leadership looks and feels like for our communities. And what better way to kick things off than with a conversation with someone whose journey deeply reflects that mission? Patricia Mota, President and CEO of ASE, the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, and the fearless leader of our beloved Amigahood. Patricia is a first generation Mexican American, a trailblazer in both nonprofit and entrepreneurial spaces, and one of the fewer than 1% of Latina CEOs in this country. That's a big deal. And we have access to her for the next hour. Her story is one of grit, vision, cultura, and heart, one that I'm sure many of us can relate to. And today we get a front row seat to hear it. So, amigas, get comfortable, lean in, and pull up a seat at her table. Hi, Patricia.
Hi, Ayla. Thank you for the kind introduction y bienvenidas a todas. Excited for not just this conversation, but the series in general. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Patricia. It really is an honor to share space with you. I mean, you are the leader of ASE, you're out doing the work. And so for you to, be president of Amigahood, it's not something we take lightly, but it's also something that we want to normalize, right? Having these powerhouse voices come to our community and really like breaking the barriers, get no gatekeeping here. That's the point of this series. To just, have an hour of mentorship and storytelling. And so, Patricia, you have an impressive bio that I can sit here and read verbatim. But because this is your table, I'd love for you to tell us who is Patricia? What are you, or what about you are you most proud of? And who are you showing up as today for this conversation? Because, yes, you are President and CEO of ASE, you're the founder of fintech company, and I can go on and on and on. But who are you showing up as here?
Yeah, no, well, um, we are certainly living in a unique time and place. And I think that I can talk about my trajectory and my history, but I think it's hitting a little stronger these days in the sense that I always show up as the daughter of immigrants, as a first generation college graduate and professional. But because of some of those identities, it's been part of my personal mission and my personal why to help close these gaps. You know, growing up. Predominantly low income, Black Mexican neighborhood. I had the opportunity as a high school student to move to another public high school my junior year. And while these are both public high schools in the United States of America, the key difference was the social economic status. And not just the social economic status from one neighborhood to another, it was a culture shock, going from predominantly Black Mexican to predominantly white. But as a high school student, at least for me, it was, you kind of connect and at least for me, it was like making friends, but felt a little bit different. But the most shocking was that my peers back home versus what we had access to versus this new environment, which, for example, we had colleges and universities recruiting us from all over versus my original high schools, predominantly the military and the community college, with nothing wrong with those, but that was what we had access to only. My new high school meeting with my guidance counselor to talk about college to career versus often and day, versus my original, we met twice a year if we got lucky. Um, and when it came to academic rigor was different. We were talking about AP classes. So that's I think was my first eye-opening experience where I tell people that I live the education gap, the access gap, the equity gap that exists in many of our underrepresented, underserved communities, just based on where we grow up, based on your first generation and what we have access to. And so I think I've always showed up with that, and it's a little more profound these days. Um, where, where we're seeing a lot more of that access that is being taken away for various reasons, right? And opportunities that are being taken away. So, and I know as Latinas, it hits us a little bit different, you know? And so I do think when this opportunity came with Amigahood and to continue this community, there was no doubt in my mind that in the time and place that we're living in right now, that we cannot not offer this. We cannot not say there's this space, there's this healing circles, there's this comunidad that's for you, brought to you by us, for us, and that will continue to thrive regardless, right? And we've got to be here for you. And to your point is connect, make up, create opportunity, not to gatekeep, right? Because that is how we're going to continue to thrive.
Wow, you said a mouthful, Patricia. First of
Yeah.
all, thank you for recognizing that and carrying that with you, from childhood through your career, even the work that you're doing here. I can definitely relate, going to certain high schools and, certain districts, you see that there's a whole other world, and it really just depends on your zip code, which you don't, as a child, you don't choose, right? Your racial background, skin color, culture, language, again, things that you
Mhm.
don't choose, but they completely shaped the trajectory of your future, and thinking about the students that were at your old high school that, maybe got recruited by community college and
Mm.
military. Again, nothing wrong with those choices, but there's a whole other world that, wasn't presented to them as
Yeah.
readily. And so that's super important. Well, while we're chatting about, your past, we want to learn more about Patricia La Niña. Can you share a little bit about your upbringing, and your family's immigration experience? How did that shape your earliest dreams and beliefs about success?
Yeah, well, I say I'm the proud daughter of immigrants. Uh, how my parents did not immigrate together; they immigrated on their own. They met in Chicago at a baile on Thanksgiving Day, in their early 20s, and that's where my parents met. But each of their immigrant stories are a little bit unique. Where my father, was lost his father at a young age at 5 years in a rancho in Los Reales, Zacatecas, and in his late teens, still a young boy, came to the U.S. so that he can work and provide back for my abuelita that was still a widow by then, and then my mother came with my grandfather, so her father and my grandmother from that side, because my grandfather came to work at the U.S. steel mills. And so, they went to Northwest Indiana, Gary, Indiana, which is right where I grew up next to East Chicago, Indiana, border southeast side of Chicago. And so they each had their own unique kind of stories and coming as late teens and, in their late teens, and met in their early 20s. But as they, met and moved to East Chicago, Indiana, and I have three brothers and a younger sister, we had the dual experience of being able to visit my grandparents from my mom's side, who were in Gary, Indiana, and spend time with them. And then summers, not all summers, but we had a couple summers where my dad would do the drive to Zacatecas, to Los Reales. So that from Chicago, from East Chicago, that's like 24 hours to the border to Laredo, and then another, half day or so to get to Los Reales and the Rancho. And every single year we would pack up toys or clothes that no longer fit us, whatever we could, um, and we would take it with us and take it to the families, and really taught me about the spirit of giving back at a young age. And I was telling you earlier, Ayla, I got to meet with some cousins I haven't seen in many, many years in Mexico this month. And the one thing that they kept saying about how much they adored my parents is that, how much that they would give back, right? They were like, they would bring your older brother's clothes, your clothes, things. And cornflakes. I don't know how that came out, but they were so grateful for the cornflakes, and so I think that it's the what that taught me was that, but also with being with my abuelita, who was a widowed since my father was 5 years old, never remarried, but her spirit of faith and hard work and humility and God fearing, and being able to just spend time with her and tan humilde in the rancho where we would have it's a little home built out of rocks that my dad and his brothers had built out of their own hands, and very humbling beginnings, and I think that her strength, and really being a matriarch of that family taught me strength, perseverance, and faith. And from my mother's side and my grandfather, after the steel mills had closed down, the power of business, because he then opened up an auto dealership on Gary on Fifth Avenue, a Chavez Auto Sales that my uncles from that side have evolved and maintained. But I think there's a lot of lessons around perseverance, faith, humility, and familia at the end of the day, and giving back that were all very key moments for me growing up.
Wow, I so relate. And amigas, if you relate too, please put that in the chat. Just, creating boxes, that was something that we did. We would send boxes back over to Dominican Republic. When I met my Cuban side for the first time, my mom was like, don't go empty-handed, ask them what they need. And I came with like a suitcase of my own stuff, but also like things that they had requested I brought from the States that we take for granted. Like even like
Hmm.
they wanted a new toilet seat, things like that.
Yeah.
So I totally relate to that. And I just want to pause really quick because, we're diving into childhood stories, and I just want everyone on the call to take a moment to close your eyes and take a deep breath and connect to your younger self in this moment and recognize that this, little person that is part of your history, that is part of your DNA and part of who you are is always with you still. You carry them. You carry that person with you. And while maybe your dreams have shifted, maybe, your path has shifted or looked different than what you originally thought, that that spirit, the dreamer, the person with the wild imagination, with the family values, with this rich cultura and history, is still within you. And maybe you have, lost sight of them, but they're still there, and you still honor them. And you show up as them, as this, adult version of them, with more authority, more power, more confidence. But that dreamer is still there, right?
Mm, love that.
So just want everyone to invite their inner child to this conversation and recognize, it is okay if things have shifted a bit from what you thought you were going to be, right? We all had dreams of, when I grow up, I want to be this, and maybe you are, or maybe you aren't. And that is okay, but how can you still connect to that person? Because as we're hearing from Patricia, there's so much richness here, so much, value, core values that were created in this season of your life that doesn't leave you. That doesn't leave you. No matter what, no matter, what institutions you end up in, what systems you end up in. The spirit of who you are is in your DNA. It's in your blood, right? It's in your bloodline. And so we carry them always. So everyone, please invite your inner child to this conversation, and make space for them and honor them. So thank you, Patricia, for that insight. So how did your younger self show up in your educational journey, and how does she continue to show up in your personal life today? How do your experiences as a child inform the career path that you've chosen? Already, I'm hearing, the spirit of giving back was very
Mm.
powerful and very present in your childhood, and here you are leading a whole nonprofit that has touched so many Latinos all over the country. So, can you speak a little bit more to that connection of your younger self and your present self?
Yeah, I think education was always key in our household, and I know for, let's say, the primos and the familia in Mexico, it looked like we were well to do because of, right, we were bringing things back. But I knew we were financially strapped. But even with that, like the power that still our household prioritize is how do we continue to give back, right? And make sure that all of my siblings and I knew about that. But one of the profound moments that I had in terms of education and La Niña, let's say first grade, right? I think for me, and I share this because it has, maybe I didn't realize it back then, but it has kind of been a key consistent throughout my education and my career, is understanding the power of sharing your dreams and aspirations. And again, I didn't realize it then. And I always love to share the story of Mrs. Martinez. You know, she was like the first person, the first educator that I said, I want to be just like you. Because, you know, you're surrounded by strong women, and at least in my growing up, but I hadn't met someone that was like in a profession, right? And in this case, being a first grade teacher. And so I looked up to her and I told her one day that I wanted to be just like her. And what happened as a result of that, and as I self-reflected, because I didn't realize it then. And so I always encourage us to self-reflect on what are those personal stories that we have, because there's a lesson, right? Um, and and as a result of that, because I have a younger sister at home, she would give me the extra worksheets and stickers so I can go practice being teacher at home. And then she encouraged my mother through, I believe it was like you know, one of those parent teacher conferences with me, to say for her to do what she can. So one day I get home from school and then there's like a chalkboard. So she's like, you know, enseña a tu hermana, like teach your sister, right? What you learned. And so fast forward to second grade, Miss Martinez would invite me back to help grade the first grade. So I always say that was my first internship. And grading meant just putting stickers but I say that again, it was a profound moment because it taught me, and fast forward, it's been a consistent theme, is sharing my dreams and aspirations with mentors, with folks in my circle, because you never know the tools, resources, the connections, the introductions that are going to come your way as a result of that. And I think whenever I shy away, because I still find myself there from doing the ask or from, you know, asking the question or sharing, I have to remind myself of that story, so that it gives me that inspiration or that empowerment, or to help, you know, kind of simmer down the fear that I may have, which is why I think that those type of moments that we've all had some sort of moment is important for us to self-reflect and to understand, so that it could be part of our toolbox to fuel when it comes to mitigating, managing the fear that comes up, right?
Absolutely. Wow. And that's such a beautiful connection too, because, you know, maybe you didn't end up in the classroom, but you're teaching in so many ways just in your leadership, right? And there's,
Hmm.
again, this dedication, this commitment to giving back in some way and creating, you know, pathways for others.
Hmm.
Amigas, please, you know, start thinking about questions that you have for Patricia. If there's anything that's coming up for you, we will reserve time soon for you to ask your questions. And this is a conversation, right? So you can unmute, you know, this isn't like some big old production. This is an intimate conversation for all of us to be a
Hmm.
part of. So, Patricia, from stepping into the interim CEO role here at ASE, and now this is your role, to co-founding a fintech startup, you've been at the helm of some very major transformations. What internal battles did you face during these pivotal moments? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I I think again, sometimes when I stepped in as interim, I thought it was just that interim. Let's set it up, make sure whoever the board director we bring on board is set up for success, and that I could be there to support that individual. Um, and again, it was through our asset network, board of directors, my own peers, because I also completed the Mujeres de Asset program when it was in 2010 as I launched that. So my own cohort of Mujeres de Asset that um, kept telling me, like, are you crazy? You need to put your name in the hat to formally go to the role. And I think that part of battling some of these internal battles for myself is making sure that I'm consistently surrounding myself with folks that will push me, tell me the truth, whether it's not so positive that I don't want to hear. Um, and so I think that that was one when it came to interim, to then formally say, all right, I have this community backing me. And then the fears that I had, like maybe I don't know too much about A, D, and I don't know, F, right? Um, but having that community of folks that, hey, I am really great at I'm gonna have your back and I'm gonna support you. That has been such a consistent thing throughout my career, that I've been super grateful for. I mean, one is like, yeah, you do the work, and but two is making sure that um I am also counting my blessings along the way. So I think it's been a combination of really entrusting the people that trust me, and trusting in myself, right? And I think that type of advisory committee, or whatever we call it, our personal board of directors, mentors, sponsors, is so critical, and has helped me, not only the battles that I faced back then, but that continue to face till this day, to be able to have that support. So. And I don't know, sometimes I call it that little voice in my head that pops up that says, you're not ready enough, you don't know enough. But having people that I can lean into, I think is pivotal. The last thing I'll say on this point is one thing that I love to say, and because I truly believe it, and I still pinch myself when I've found myself in key places and moments, but that dreams truly flourish when you cultivate them with community. And that's, I think that the power of community is just tremendous. But it's up to us as individuals to lean in, right? And I think that all of other amigos that are here, right? It's about leaning in for yourself, but also understanding why you're doing that. And so if I can make a greater impact, the challenge is, and I'll say this, the other battle is when I first started at ASE, I was day to day with Mujeres de ASE or other programs where I got to know all of the participants, like, they're personally, professionally. So that was another battle as I transitioned more into a leadership role. I don't get to know them as much. So, and it's bittersweet. I get to hear at the graduation, but I do miss that. But I have to keep in mind that I can make a bigger impact in this role, right? And there's other people that we can empower to be doing some of these other things. So,
Yeah, I love that you mentioned community, of course.
yeah.
We hear these words thrown around a lot, your personal board of directors, your advisors, sponsors.
hmm
Can you talk a little bit about how do you like organically develop these relationships? So I think, for a lot of folks, we understand that these are critical and very necessary to our career, but sometimes, building those relationships feels scary or not really
Yeah.
sure how to go about it without it feeling like I'm just taking from you. So how do those relationships form? How do they feel reciprocal? Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about relationship building?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one is I don't want to lose sight that I am obviously in a position that now with role and title, depending, makes it perhaps a little easier for some doors to be open, right? So I don't want to lose sight of that. I think that the other piece to consider were some of the core relationships that have happened over time. And it's not just through ASEP, but these are other communities that I'm a part of. And this, which is why I'm a big believer in cohort model leadership programs or cohort model spaces where you're working with a group of, or not working, but you're building a trusting and a relationship, and you're having some type of experience with a group of 15, 20 or so other people. Because not only has it been through my own Mujeres ASE cohort, it's been through, I'm part of a Latina sorority, my own Line Sisters, right? That's like a cohort modeled through Leadership Greater Chicago. I'm a fellow of that. All of these group experiences that I've had where we're meeting over a series of time is a time commitment for me, but it's also you're investing in those other people in those rooms. So guess what? Anytime I am making a phone call or I'm reaching out or I have the ask, those group of individuals are more likely, like, yeah, they're because we've gotten to build that over time. Of course, it's tougher when you're doing a random LinkedIn message, or
Yeah.
so that's why through community, I call these communities, whether it's Leadership Greater Chicago, I've done the Aspen Institute Executive Program. It's part of being an avid learner, but it's also part of investing in yourself and others so that when you're knocking on those doors are opening right away. And that takes time. I understand that, right? So it's being strategic and prioritizing what are the key community groups, networks and then the other one is who do you already have in your circle? And we're all like, connected to one another, right? Like that can make those introductions because like the cold calling or the individual, that's usually not as successful as if you have someone that already knows you really well, that knows that person to make that introduction, right? Or to make that connection. So yeah, those are the ones that I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And ASE offers a lot of this. You know, there's different programs that you can join and it is a
Mm-hmm.
cohort model. So I put a link in the chat for those who are interested. I know Mujeres de ASE in the fall is coming up soon.
Mm-hmm.
And, just a myriad of programs. So please, amigos, take advantage of, the resources that are here for you at your fingertips. Check it out. And of course, being part of Amigahood, you are part of a community that really wants to support you. But community is a two-way street, right? You show up, but it's not just about, logging in and kind of lurking. Like, be involved, take up space, and we invite you to. You're encouraged to. There's no judgment here. And I promise you, if there's a question that you have, somebody has the answer or knows somebody who does. If there's something that you need, somebody has that thing or knows somebody that does, right? But closed mouths don't get fed. So you have to not just ask, but also be in a position where
Mm-hmm.
you can give too. It's all about giving and receiving and understanding that flow and that dance. And it is very natural. It can feel a little uncomfortable at first, right? To put yourself out there because so much of our lives we've had to, maybe shrink a little bit or not be too
Mm-hmm.
much, not be too loud, calladita te ves más bonita. That does not apply here. That does not apply here. You are welcome here. We want to hear your voice. We want to see you. We want to embrace you and hold you. And so just know that, when you find a community that does offer that and it does feel inviting, then just accept the invitation and show up and you'll be surprised at the gifts that come from, resources and people that you meet that you can receive, but also the opportunity for you to give and to pour into and show up with your gifts and it is appreciated. So thank you, Patricia, for mentioning that. Um, so, amigas, we are going to start Q&A in a couple of minutes. So please get your questions ready. Again, feel free to unmute, come off camera, join the conversation. And the chat box is open too if you're in a place where you can't, but you do want to ask. We'll be
Mm-hmm.
managing the chat as well. So, Patricia, so many Latinas in leadership not just carry the pressure to succeed, right? But to represent their families, especially as a first gen. Sometimes we feel like, or not even sometimes, all the time, right? We feel like we're doing this for people more than just ourselves, right? That we're carrying so much more. How has that responsibility shown up for you, and how have you learned to carry it without letting it weigh you down?
Yeah, it's a great question. I um mentioned earlier that there's three older brothers and a younger sister, and I also grew up in a household where traditional gender roles, were that was the expectation, in terms of um with my father and los hombres hacen esto y las mujeres no type of thing. I mean, now that he's elderly, things have evolved, but and I was always the one, and being the first girl, I was like, no, pa, like that's and he would just like look at me. But I also was grateful that I had three older brothers that supported me, right? And they were able to say like, push me in that. I say that because I think that there was a lot of expectation. I mean, even back then, but I've got eight wonderful nieces and nephews that range from 6 years of age to 26. The 26-year-old just had a newborn, so now I'm a great aunt. And I'm the only one without a child. I'm the only one not married. So my parents in the family, they're like, I've always kind of like did not the opposite, but kind of more of what traditional expectations were of me. And even to this day, I think what my parents say in terms of my job to family members is like, oh, she does something for the Latinos, like she's for the community, right? So I know that we've had like our qualms and even with like the tias and the comments and all of that. What's been pivotal is to make sure that I cannot help or support my wonderful nieces and nephews, my siblings, my this next generation to come, or my own personal mission if I am not okay with where I am personally.
Hmm.
And I think that that self-alignment, at least, a couple times a year, but for sure, at least once a year, where I block out some time just to do that personal check-in to say, am I at a time, both personally and professionally, that I am proud of? And it does, and to cut out all the other voices, all of the other expectations. And I love that, when with especially having a younger sister, she's always even asked me like, how has it come so easy for you? And I'm like, no one ever said it's been easy. It's not that it's easy. It's like I make sure I'm doing the work. So the self-care, right? The self-reflection, to make sure that first and foremost, it's like what that analogy that you cannot take care of anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself. That the choices and decisions that I'm making, if I were to be gone tomorrow and I could say this right now, I'll be 100% happy with, and I say, you know what, God, I did the best that I could for myself and for what is expected of me from me personally. And I am a big believer in faith. And I think sometimes as women, as Latinas in my circles, is that we're always, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to please everyone else in our lives, but I'm doing it my way and I'm still going to make a difference. And I think that the way that I've been able to carry deal with the pressures is making sure I'm consistently doing that self check-in, which for me is personal, that self-reflection, the journaling that I do a check-in at least once, I'm not 1 week per the year. And then, getting the workouts in and um yeah, so I would say that.
Wow, well, that's powerful, Patricia. We talk about like defining success on your own terms, but to hear you say it in that way and to be so unapologetic about it, that's so powerful. It's so powerful to say, these are the expectations that others have put on me,
Hmm.
and that's from their own stuff. It has nothing to do with me.
Exacto.
These are the expectations that I have of myself that will make me happy, that will make me proud to look in the mirror and say, yep, the way that I'm doing life, the way that I'm choosing to exist in this world, I am proud of that. That to me
Hmm.
is success. So, amigas, take from that what you will. If there's anything that you take away from this conversation, it's understanding you have much more power over the trajectory, not just of your career, but of your life than you really think. Of
Hmm.
course, there's faith, right? Of course, there's things that happen beyond our control that
Yeah.
was already written for us. Um, but you have a choice to make these decisions, and some people aren't going to understand, and that's okay. And some people may have their opinions about it. That's okay. But at the end of the day, can you sit with yourself and say, I'm happy. I'm proud. That's success. That's so beautiful. Thank you, Patricia, for that.
Thank you.
So, amigas, we're gonna open the floor. I'm sure a lot of things are coming up for you. So just to keep things organized, if you just want to like raise your hand on Zoom chat, just so we can, keep a running list and we're not all talking at once. But I'm actually gonna take out remove our spotlight so it feels like we're all in the same room. And yeah, have at it. What questions do you have for Patricia? Or perhaps there are, maybe some reflections that came up that you just want to share. Kenya, I see you.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kenya. I just wanted to say this is my first time meeting you, Patricia, or like I've been part of Amigahood, and this is the first event I attend after you asked it to um,
Hmm.
over, and I feel like I just feel so seen, and I want to thank you for sharing your story. I I feel that there's a lot going on internally, and I was holding a journalist space in Amigahood, and I started working as a teacher, and everything that you shared resonated, a lot resonated, and I just wanted to share that it feels like in my career I don't have there's like it's hard for me to scale up, or it's not that it's hard, but it's like either you going to kind of um admin work, or it just feels like not unattainable, but I feel kind of stuck. And then I left teaching for 2 years and started my own business. And I also felt like there was I have such a complex story, just like, or unique story, just like all Latinas. So I think my question is, right now I just feel there's so much. So I'm sorry. I'm like all over the place, but I just, I know you mentioned like self-care, but like I feel like I'm in this space where I just feel um like I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. It feels like one thing is after another. Feels like it feels so personal with everything that's going on in the
Mm.
world. And then um in my own life, like it just feels like I'm so alone, and I know that's not true. I mean, I've done a lot of work, and I know there's like this community exists, but I'm also a poet, and like even in my poems, I'm like I see my writing, and I'm like, who is this person? Like she's in a dark place, and so I just I feel like I'm showing up to some of the healing, and it still feels so heavy. So what do you say, or what, because I also feel like kind of like a hypocrite if I come on the other side, like, oh, let's do the work. Like it just feels so like no, like, and
Yeah.
I just, yeah, there's so much, but thank you
Well, I
for.
mean, thank you for sharing, Kenya. I think that I said this at the beginning of our conversation with Ayla, and there is no doubt in that I hear you and what you're saying for your personal story, but as I think about the Latina community in general, that everything that's happening is extra heavy just because, you know, and generally speaking, right, we lead with heart and obviously this is personal for a lot of obvious reasons in terms of our community that's being attacked. I think one of the other things when I talk about the self-care is making sure that I am focusing on what I can control because if I am going all over here on all the things that are out of my sphere of control, then that's where uncertainty lies. I think you ever heard the old wolves tale that says, there's a wolf that you feed. It's either fear or it's faith, and fear comes with uncertainty, chaos, sadness, hurt. Faith comes with hope, inspiration, right? So which one are you feeding on a daily basis? And then on top of that, however that is for you, like it could be, right, writing your poems, it could be the comunidad and the journaling and things. But on top of that, then is how do you focus on what your sphere and control? Because we can, um, it can get a little chaotic if it's things that we're not on control. We can't do it all. So if it's that one thing that you're doing and it's impacting like 10 people or 5 people, that's powerful. I sat down with a couple leaders a couple months ago, and one of the things when I was kind of saying something similar to you to them, they're like, the most powerful thing in history that you've seen how change has come to be is through coalition building, is through small groups. It's not like a big old thing. It's not like a big impactful. It's through small. So like this, which is why these type of conversations are important. So continue to lean in on your faith, focus on what you can control, and then continue to be part of Amigahood. It sounds like there's a career transition. I encourage Mujeres de Asset, that program where it's a program that's starting in the fall, where you get career coaching, individual assessment. So that's another platform to build a comunidad and to help you with that next step in your career.
Thank you so much.
So welcome.
Thank you, Kenya, for sharing. Wanda, I see that your hand is raised. Feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, hello, hola, todas las que están aquí. I'm actually going to ask a question, not necessarily for me, but I saw it in the chat and I made a comment about it. A fellow attendee talked about that her major challenge is that she's 50 plus and feels like she's the oldie in these types of groups. She's a first-time budding entrepreneur. And then there was another one that responded, their age, with some positive reinforcement that she can do it. And I just wanted to ask the question on their behalf. What words of wisdom would you share with them? And I'm 62. I just turned 62 the other day, and I'm not ashamed of it.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, because just having, I'll put my little face there. Just having a birthday, just having another year around the sun is a big blessing, no matter what life brings at us. And it's not that it's easy. There are things like you said, Patricia, if I can call you that, that we have no control over, right? But what we can put our energies on is what we can control. But that's not always easy for us, right? Depending on our cultural values, how we were raised, our experiences. So what words of wisdom would you give those that feel a little bit maybe on the older side when they're in these types of groups? Because I said that we have the ability to have more impact now more than ever because of our experiences, and not to discount that. But what would you say?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think through the greater community, not just Amigahood, but even with ASE, there's a lot of folks within, the age group that are involved, that are doing speaking engagements or even participating in our programs. So I don't think that there's a specific, age. I know obviously with age there comes different experiences. I will, to the question regarding focusing on what you control. No, it's not always easy. And you talk about cultural values, and Ayla mentioned it earlier, where I didn't realize, and this was subconsciously until I started doing the work that I do, that the little calladita voice was showing up in meetings or in situations where I was like, oh, if the executive didn't ask me for a question, then I'm not going to say anything. And I didn't realize it then until, again, self-awareness and realizing that some of these cultural nuances, things that I was comfortable with because it was culturally, nothing wrong with them. But when it came to specific tables that I was at, that had a different expectation for me to speak up, to advocate, to show up, show my talents. I didn't know that until I was self-aware and what were some of the cultural things that were holding me back. So that, not that I ever change who I am, because I think a lot of our values, generally speaking, are beautiful values. But how do I adapt how I'm communicating, how I'm influencing, how I'm showing up, in order to be effective, never compromising who I am or the values that I have. And yeah, after time that gets exhausting. I need to go hang out with my amigas. I need to go hang out with, and do that. But I think that that's in the sphere of my control, and is that self-awareness and putting it into practice, no matter what age you are. I think it's something that's evolving, for everyone and depending on what stage of life you're in. So
Thank
great
you.
question. Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you, Wanda. Is there anyone else who has a question? Patricia Martin, I don't mean to call you out, but I see like it looks like you're thinking. And so I just wanted to invite you, if you did want to say anything, the floor is open, and that goes for anyone.
And before, if you do say anything, I want to make sure, because I saw Liliana on here and Kenya, that you two connect if you're not already, if Kenya's already. Because Liliana just graduated from our Mujeres Entrepreneurs and has an amazing organization. I don't know if she's listening too. That's offering services. Sorry, go ahead, Patricia.
Hi everyone. I was just thinking of how to even frame my question. I think I'm in a more like academic position at the moment, and I am also an adjunct lecturer. And so when I meet with college students, I think about um, like how do I provide support or advice as to like skills that they should learn across industry. Like what is like in your experience, education industry, like what would you recommend for folks to think about skills that are helpful and are needed across.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest research, not just and nationally as well, is the unemployment and underemployment of recent college grads, and that's even greater for our underrepresented youth, right? So Black, Latino, first gen, unfortunately. And part of the challenge is are the skills, right? And ensuring that our students are showing up with the soft skills that are needed, which is even a bigger challenge when you think about the impact of the pandemic. And so a lot of the soft skills that were already a challenge to begin with are now needing to. So that is one of our programs also at us, our university leadership program, where there's three main components. It's the career readiness. So it's all of those soft skills like elevator pitch, like LinkedIn, like how are you setting up, your how are you building up your network, right? Building those relationships and things like that. But then it's also your next step in preparing the students for that internship, for that first, employment. But then the third piece, which is so critical, I would say one of the most important, is making sure that they see visible Latino role models across various industries, so that they can see themselves, especially if they're first gen, right? Like they may not have that representation. We just graduated one of our university leadership cohorts earlier in the year, and we had a young gentleman. He was doing his undergrad from a university in California, but it was doing it remotely. But he lives in Mexicali, like a border town, right? And he talked about how powerful with doing the university program. It was a virtual program that he hadn't met with folks, and he got to meet peers also from other campuses, and how inspirational it was for him, that now he had, he was now thinking bigger, right? And I think that that's such a huge component. So leveraging Amigahood, ASE, right? If you want to pull in and have a guest speaker, right, to come and speak to your students or as a career awareness and different trajectory. But the second piece is definitely the soft skills, right? And I'm happy to share the university program too for students. So welcome.
Thank you, Patricia.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions? We have a couple more minutes.
Hi, I'll ask something.
Hi, Brenda.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for holding such a beautiful space. I truly appreciate it. It's been so motivational just hearing you both speak, and everyone who's participated. I'm a first gen Latina, and growing up, like everyone has shared, I didn't really see a lot of like representation in my community of professionals. As a professional myself, sometimes I navigate like a lot of self-doubt. So I just had a question, like how do you navigate that, or what are some tips or tools to kind of, I know it's a process, but how to, if you can share any of your own kind of tips to break that or to work towards that.
Yeah, I think that, and that's something that is very common with women, Latinas in general. I think when we first started doing our Mujeres Hace program, you see the number of degrees that our comunidad, our Latinas have, the titles that we have, some of the companies or the organizations that we're working on, and despite it all, somehow, for some reason, we're still like, I'm not ready enough, or it's not my time, and it's not. But that's why I'm such a big proponent of our Mujeres as a program, because I've seen the evolution of folks that are going through the program and then they're going back and you're speaking up. We just graduated a cohort of Mujeres Hace in Dallas, and we had one of the testimonials. She did her own speech at the graduation, and this was in Dallas. And she goes up and she says, "My husband and I just moved here from Puerto Rico 4 years ago." And she's like, And she got a great job. She was working for a higher ed institution. She was working closely for the president's office. So she had, a pretty good role. And she's like, I'm getting all these speaking engagement requests. She's like, but I keep turning them down. She's like, but it wasn't until I did this program that then I knew I had a support group of other folks that she got to test herself with, that she got so that when she did walk into the room, and here she was public speaking at the graduation. So I think is having that those folks that tell you that little voice in your head when you're getting ready to ask the question or to do the presentation to say, no, I'm a badass. Like I know I am. Like they told me I'm ready. I think is something that I think is been part of the toolkit to make sure that you're and then the second thing I would add is always your why. Like I think in instances where I've had that extra fear, I think about my little Andrina, my 6-year-old niece, or like the funny things that she was saying about her future, and just the next generation that I do truly believe is my personal mission to help be that inspiration for them. So whatever that personal purpose that you have that in your heart, in your mind when you have that fear that's showing up.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, amigas, for all of these questions. So I do want to wrap up with one more question, Patricia. Can you describe a time where you said, yes, I belong in this room, I deserve this seat? And what would you say to your younger self, thinking about that power that you held?
Was it 3 years ago in November? I was an invited speaker to a global women's forum in Reykjavik, Iceland. A global women's forum to talk about the pay gap. Mind you, according to the United Nations, Reykjavik is like up there in terms of having achieved gender equity. They're not perfect, but they have technically achieved gender in terms of pay, in terms of women in positions of power. So having been asked to go speak on this global platform about the pay gap, not only was it my responsibility to talk about Latinas and the pay gap in the US, but from a global perspective as well, because in a lot of the global, and this happens in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of the global platforms that talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, or pay gap, they're not necessarily talking about the impact of the color of your skin, there's Latinas, there's Black, right, that are in these countries, and how that has provided additional oppression as it pertains to opportunities, as it pertains to pay. So one is, oh my God, I was invited. But two, it was like, oh, the responsibility as what do I bring to the table that is a differentiation in this global platform. I talked about that, yes, it's not about just gender, but it's about all these other identity layers that create additional oppression or opportunity. And I mean, Ayla, I think the question is I would be proud, right, to my younger self to have been there, but I also think about the responsibility. And after that talk, women came up to me from various countries and said, I've never heard it addressed that way. Thank you for doing that because it's so true. Of course, I had to do my research outside of the US and to be able to, but to say that on a global platform, and as Latinas, being bicultural, multicultural, we bring so much to the global platform. So think globally. I think I was telling my younger self, wow, back then when I was dreaming, I never have dreamt global stage or global platform. But we all should be because we have so much to offer for this world. And if anybody's going to get us to a better place, I truly believe it's Latinas.
I agree. Wow, Patricia, thank you truly for your honesty, your wisdom, and the generosity in which you've shared your story today. You've reminded us that leadership isn't just about titles, it's about purpose, it's about identity, about community, comunidad, right? And this understanding that, my voice matters. It does. And you're talking about this global stage, and younger Patricia wanted to be a teacher in East Chicago, and adult Patricia is in Iceland, right? So to everyone here, amigas, I hope you're leaving this conversation feeling seen, inspired, and reminded of the power of your own story because every one of us has a seat at the table too. In fact, we have our own table, right? We have our own table that we can invite others to. So thank you for joining us for the first of many meaningful conversations in this series. Patricia, it was an honor. And we, of course, had to kick it off with you, right? There's no one better.
Thank you, Ayla. My pleasure.
Of
Pleasure.
course.
Thank you, everyone. Gracias, amigas.
Yes, thank you. We'll see you at the next one.
Gracias.
And until then, keep showing up, lifting up others, and keep lifting with corazón. Thank you.
Thank you.